how do you discern what stories to include or not include, or how to modify them based on your children's age?
Yeah, yeah. So I think the a lot of it has to do with like the kid's age, of course. And we decided, my wife and I, Brittany, we decided early on, that we would um, the only story that we like wouldn't modify is the crucifixion narrative.
Mm,
And so everything else, we would like avoid like talking about like violence. Not, I mean, not avoid talking about it, but we would say things like they hurt each other,
mm-hmm,
or
Hmm.
they were mean to each other, like that sort of thing, instead
mm-hmm.
of like, they drowned all the babies in the river.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
we didn't say stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. And it was more of a like a we don't want to be like dishonor the Bible and
Mm-hmm.
the how God revealed that. Um, but we also thought, man, let's focus in on like these people, like there is sin, but like our kids don't need to like know the ins and outs of that
Mm-hmm.
sin just yet. And especially my oldest, Ari, he is like super sensitive, like very,
Mm-hmm.
very sensitive. And so stuff like really um, gets to him. And so
Mm-hmm.
and so I guess how do you discern? One is like, what do they, we have to ask the question, like, what do they need to know to understand, like, what's going on here? Does like a 5-year-old, like, really need to know that Pharaoh killed all the babies? Like,
Mm-hmm.
no, I
Mm.
don't think so. He doesn't need to know that Herod, tried to kill all the babies either. But that said, we felt like the crucifixion is like
Hmm.
very integral to the gospel narrative. And so early on, I mean, we just read the crucifixion narrative to them, and of course, my oldest, who was like could understand a lot more at the time. I mean, the first time we read it, he just like cried and cried and
Mm.
cried, and then for a long stretch, like around Easter or Christmas or whatever, he would say like, I don't want to read about Jesus dying. I don't want to read about that. But we like made him anyway because, and so like we felt like we want to shield him from like violence
Mm-hmm.
as much as possible, except for stuff like the crucifixion, because like we really want him to understand and feel and know like all that God has done for us.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if that answers the question
No,
or
yeah.
answers it well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think, like you said, your oldest is more sensitive. Our 3-year-old is quite tender and sensitive in that way too. Just things that are, even if they're sweet, he'll cry about them, or if they're a little bit
Hmm.
sad, he'll cry about them. And so I think it's also knowing the temperament of your child too, like what can they
Hmm. Hmm.
handle and what can they
Right.
not. I even think about when we shared with another guest that I probably watched Passion of the Christ a little too young, and it was like a little too scary for me, and I haven't watched it since because it was like so impactful to me. Like the crucifixion should be impactful to us,
Right. Hmm.
and maybe it's okay that it's a little scary because it was scary, and it's something that we should kind of have the weight on for us. So I like that. I like
Yeah.
that approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, even I mean we have shown our son like videos of like when he was born and he like heard himself cry for the first time and he like weeps.
Cries.
He's like, "Why is the baby?" He's like, "Why is the baby crying?"
Oh
It's like,
yeah,
"Hey
it's
man, that
funny.
was you when you came out into the world for the first time." So yeah, exactly what Lauren said. He's definitely tender-hearted
Yeah.
in that. And so I guess for us, like the follow up question to that would be when the time comes, like how do we navigate through tough themes, right? With little ones, right? And how do we go about that again with taking into consideration, the age,
Hmm.
of the child.
Hmm. Two things that so Jesus, in the Gospels says like the two greatest commandments: love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and the second one is like it: love your neighbor as yourself. And so, like as an Old Testament scholar, and when I teach the Old Testament, when I write about the Old Testament, I like to read it through what I call the Great Commandment lens.
Mm.
So I think that the whole Old Testament and the New Testament comes down to loving God and loving people. And so that guides everything I do, with the kids, with grown-ups. And so when we come to like hard issues. So for example, um, we did not read the Cain and Abel narrative to Abel. He's 5 now, almost 6. We didn't read it to him until until like a month
Mm.
ago, and then it was even like an accident because he like something came up about Cain and Abel, and I was like, oh, well, Cain killed his brother, and his face just fell, and he's like, Cain killed Abel, and he was just like heartbroken and shocked, and then I'm like scrambling, like, okay, how do I deal with this? And so like that was an instance where I was like, okay, how do we talk about this for Abel to understand? Because and so we went back to like loving God and loving your neighbor, and it's like, so okay, the way we handle the Cain and Abel narrative is like fundamentally like Cain like did not love God and he did not love his neighbor,
Mm.
right? And so failed like in both those aspects because um, my Abel was really concerned with like, well, why didn't Cain like him? Why did Abel have other friends? Did Abel have friends? Did people did not like him? What did he do to make Cain not like
Mm.
him? And so he's like identifying with like, okay, is there something that I need to avoid here so my brothers don't kill me, maybe? Um, so we tried to frame it in those terms, like no, like the violence against Abel, like it wasn't Abel's fault, but it was like a failure to love God
Mm.
and love neighbor. And like we read through the David narratives recently, and we didn't go into like the the things that David did against Bathsheba and against Uriah because they're like little kids, and so we just instead of like reading the narrative, the like those sections of it were like David didn't love God and he didn't love his neighbors. He didn't love Bathsheba and he didn't love Uriah. And of course they're like, well, what? It's like, what did they do? What did he do? And it's like, well, it's not important right now. Like you don't need to know. You just need to know that like he hurt them and like didn't love
Yeah.
them. So we take it really on like a case by case
Yeah.
basis, and try to emphasize, did this person or does this story show love for God and love for neighbor?
Hmm.
And if not, like, why not?